He found her brushing his neglected horse. The cowboy said he hasn't let anyone touch him. The first thing Caleb Turner noticed was the silence. It was wrong. His ranch was never truly quiet. There was always the sound of wind pushing across the Wyoming plains, the creak of old fence posts, the restless shuffle of horses in their pens. But that morning in the spring of 1879, as Caleb walked back from checking the north pasture, the air felt still in a way that made the hair on his arms stand up. Then he saw her. A young woman stood inside the far corral, her back to him, her hand moving slowly along the neck of the wildest horse he owned. Caleb stopped walking. His boots sank into the dry dirt as he stared, hardly daring to breathe. The horse was Midnight, went a black stallion with eyes like storm clouds and a temper that had broken 3 good men. Midnight had not let anyone near him in 2 years. Not since the accident. Not since Caleb's younger brother had tried to saddle him and ended up with a shattered leg that never healed right. Since then, the stallion had been left alone. Fed, watered, but left alone. And now a stranger stood beside him, brushing his tangled mane as if he were nothing more than a gentle farm pony. Caleb felt anger rise first. Who in the world thought they could just walk onto his land and touch his horse? He moved forward slowly, his jaw tight. The woman wore a faded blue dress, the hem dusty from travel. Her brown hair was tied back in a loose braid that had begun to fall apart. She looked thin, tired, like someone who had been on the road too long. But her hands were steady. Midnight's head was lowered. Caleb had never seen that horse lower his head for anyone. "He hasn't let anyone touch him," Caleb said, his voice sharp as he reached the fence. The woman did not jump. She did not pull away. She only turned her head slightly, just enough to look at him over her shoulder. Her eyes were gray, soft but clear. "He just did," she said quietly. Caleb climbed over the fence, landing hard in the dirt. Midnight flicked an ear toward him, but did not rear, did not lash out. Caleb stopped a few feet away, disbelief burning in his chest. "That horse threw my own brother," he said. "He bit a ranch hand clean through the arm. You need to step away." The woman ran the brush down Midnight's neck again. The stallion let out a slow breath. "He's not mean," she said. "He's scared." Caleb almost laughed at that. "Scared?" he repeated. "That animal weighs 1,200 pounds. And he still remembers pain," she answered. Her words hit harder than he expected. Caleb looked at Midnight, really looked at him for the first time in months. The burrs caught in his mane, the dull coat, the scar along his flank from where he had tangled with barbed wire. Caleb had been busy, too busy, running the ranch alone after his brother left for Colorado, after his father passed the winter before that, after everything seemed to fall apart all at once. "I feed him," Caleb muttered. "Food keeps a body alive," the woman said. "It doesn't make it feel safe." Caleb felt heat rise in his face. "Who are you?" he asked. She finally stopped brushing and faced him fully. "My name is Rose Bennett. I came in on the morning stage. I was told there might be ranch work out this way." Caleb frowned. "Work?" he repeated. "Yes, sir." She lifted her chin slightly, though her hands trembled just a bit. "My father raised horses in Kansas. I know how to handle them. I saw this one from the road. I could tell he'd been alone too long." Caleb studied her more carefully now. She did not look like trouble. She looked like someone who had nowhere else to stand. "You just climbed my fence?" he asked. "Yes. You're either brave or foolish. Maybe both." Midnight nudged her shoulder gently. Caleb stared at the stallion in shock. The horse that had nearly killed a man now leaned into this stranger like a dog, asking for affection. "How did you do that?" Caleb asked, the anger in his voice fading into something else. Rose shrugged slightly. "I stood outside the fence for nearly an hour," she said. "I didn't rush him. I let him come to me. Horses don't forget when someone forces them." Caleb swallowed. He remembered the day his brother tried to break Midnight. The shouting, the rope pulled too tight, the fear in the horse's eyes before everything went wrong. Caleb had blamed the horse. It had been easier than blaming himself. "You shouldn't have taken the risk," he said quietly. Rose met his eyes. "Sometimes something has to change," she replied. The wind picked up then, stirring dust between them. Caleb felt like he was standing at the edge of something he did not understand. "You said you're looking for work," he said finally. "Yes." "You have family here?" "No." The word was simple, but it carried weight. My mother died last year," Rose continued. "My father passed the year before. The farm was sold. I used what little money I had to come west." Caleb felt a tightness in his chest he did not like. "I've been sleeping in the livery stable," she added. "They said you might need help." Caleb almost said no. He had managed alone for nearly 2 years. He did not need a stranger complicating his life. But then Midnight turned his head and rested it lightly against Rose's shoulder. Caleb had not seen that horse touch anyone gently in years. "If you can handle him," Caleb said slowly, "I'll give you room and board. Small wage after the first month. You help with the horses. Cooking too, if you can." Rose's eyes widened. "You mean it?" "I don't say things I don't mean." She smiled then. It was not a big smile, but it was real. "Yes, sir," she said softly. "I can cook, and I promise you, I can help him." Caleb looked at Midnight again. The stallion's dark coat caught the sunlight, and for the first time in a long while, Caleb felt something close to hope. "Come on," he said gruffly. "I'll show you the house." The ranch house sat on a low rise overlooking the fields. It was solid, but plain, built by Caleb's father 20 years earlier. It had felt too big since his brother left. Caleb showed Rose the spare room. It was simple. A narrow bed, a washstand, a window facing the barn. "It's not fancy," he said. "It's more than I had yesterday," Rose replied. That evening, she made stew from dried beans and salt pork, and somehow turned it into something that tasted warm instead of dull. They ate at the kitchen table in quiet. "How long have you had the ranch?" Rose asked gently. "All my life," Caleb said. "It was my father's before it was mine." "And your brother?" "Left after the accident," Caleb answered. "Said he couldn't look at Midnight without remembering." Rose nodded slowly. "I think the horse remembers too," she said. Caleb did not answer. Over the next week, Rose worked from sunrise to sunset. She cleaned the tack room. She brushed every horse. She mended torn feed sacks. She spoke softly when she moved through the barn. And every day, she spent hours with Midnight. Caleb watched from a distance. He told himself it was to make sure she stayed safe. But really, he watched because he could not look away. Midnight changed. The sharp edge in his eyes softened. The tension in his body eased. His coat began to shine again. One afternoon, Rose called out to Caleb. "I think he's ready," she said. "For what?" "For you." Caleb's stomach tightened. He stepped into the corral slowly. Midnight watched him, but did not rear. "Hold out your hand," Rose said quietly. "Don't force it." Caleb did. The stallion stepped forward. He sniffed Caleb's palm. Then he let Caleb touch his neck. The contact felt like something breaking open inside him. I thought he hated me, Caleb whispered. Rose shook her head. He was waiting. Caleb looked at her. For what? For you to forgive him, and maybe forgive yourself. The words settled deep. That night, Caleb sat on the porch while Rose hung laundry in the fading light. He realized the ranch did not feel so empty anymore. There was laughter in the kitchen. There was light in the windows. And there was a woman who had walked into his corral and changed everything without even trying. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, Caleb noticed something else. A rider on the far ridge, watching, still as stone. Caleb's jaw tightened. He did not recognize the man, and something in his gut told him that peace had come too easily. He had the feeling it would not last. And he was right. The rider did not move for a long time. Caleb stood on the porch with his arms crossed, watching the dark shape against the fading sky. The man sat tall in the saddle, hat pulled low, horse still as if trained to wait without sound. "Do you know him?" Rose asked quietly from behind him. Caleb shook his head. "No." They both stood there until the last light disappeared, and the rider finally turned his horse and rode back the way he had come. But Caleb did not sleep well that night. The next morning, he saddled midnight before sunrise. Rose stepped out of the barn just as he tightened the cinch. "You're going after him?" she asked. "I just want to know who's watching my land." Rose studied him carefully. "Don't go looking for trouble." Caleb met her eyes. "I won't." But he rode hard. He followed the ridge trail north, where the grass thinned and the land dipped toward Dry Creek. Hoofprints were easy enough to follow. Fresh. The trail led him to a small camp near a stand of cottonwoods. 2 horses, 1 wagon, and the same man from the ridge. The stranger was younger than Caleb expected. Early 30s, clean-shaven. Well-dressed for a man camping rough. He did not look surprised to see Caleb. "Morning," the man said calmly. "You were on my ridge yesterday," Caleb replied. "Yes." "You planning to explain that?" The man dismounted slowly. "My name is Thomas Hale," he said. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Caleb's body went still. "I don't steal," he said evenly. Hale gave a small smile. "Not steal. Harbor." Caleb felt heat rise in his chest. "Speak plain." "I'm looking for a woman," Hale said. "Brown hair, gray eyes, answers to the name Rose Bennett." Caleb's jaw tightened. What business is she of yours?" "She's my wife." The words hit like a bullet. Caleb did not show it. "You're mistaken," he said flatly. "I'm not," Hale replied. "We were married in Kansas. She left without notice, took money that wasn't hers." Caleb stepped closer. "Careful," he warned. Hale held up his hands calmly. "I'm not here to fight. I just want her returned." "She's not property," Caleb said. "She is legally bound to me." The silence stretched between them. Caleb felt something dark stir in his chest. "Did she tell you why she left?" Caleb asked. Hale's eyes hardened slightly. "She's my wife. She doesn't get to leave because she's unhappy." That was answer enough. Caleb mounted midnight again. "If you come onto my land without invitation," he said slowly, "we'll have a problem." Hale did not move. I'll give her until Sunday," he called after Caleb. "Then I come for what's mine." Caleb rode back with a storm inside him. Rose was in the barn, brushing one of the mares when he returned. She looked up immediately. "You found him?" "Yes." She set the brush down. "What did he say?" Caleb climbed down from midnight and faced her. "He says he's your husband." Rose did not deny it. Her shoulders dropped slightly, like she had been waiting for this moment. He is, she said quietly. Caleb felt something twist in his gut. Why didn't you tell me? Rose's hands trembled. Because I was afraid you would send me away. Did you leave him? Caleb asked. Yes. Why? Rose swallowed. He gambled away everything we had. When my father died, he took the money meant for the farm. He drank. He got angry. She stopped. Caleb's jaw tightened. He hit you? Rose looked down. Once became twice. Twice became many. Caleb felt the old rage rising fast. And you ran? Yes. You took his money? It was mine, she said firmly. My father left it to me. He signed it over the week before he died. Thomas never forgave that. Caleb paced once across the barn floor. He's giving you until Sunday, he said. Then he says he's coming. Rose looked pale. He won't leave quietly. Caleb stopped in front of her. You don't belong to him. The law might disagree. Then the law's wrong. Rose looked at him with something fragile in her eyes. I don't want you hurt because of me. Caleb stepped closer. You think I'd hand you over? Silence. Rose shook her head slowly. No. Good. They worked side by side the rest of the day in heavy quiet. That evening, Caleb rode into town to speak with Sheriff Dalton. The sheriff was older, gray mustache, slow movements. A husband has rights, Dalton said carefully. Not if he's violent, Caleb replied. Can she prove that? Caleb hesitated. No, Dalton sighed. Then it's complicated. Complicated doesn't mean right, Caleb said. No, the sheriff agreed. It doesn't. By Friday, the tension on the ranch was thick. Rose barely slept. Caleb checked the fences twice a day. Midnight seemed restless, pacing the corral as if he sensed the unease. Sunday came with a heavy sky. Hale arrived just after noon. He did not come alone. 2 men rode with him. Caleb stood in the yard waiting. Rose stood behind him. You have until now, Hale said calmly as he dismounted. She's not going with you, Caleb answered. Hale looked at Rose. Come here. Rose did not move. I said come here. No, she said clearly. Hale's calm expression cracked. You embarrass me, he said coldly. Running off like a child. I left because you hurt me, Rose said, voice shaking but steady. Hale stepped forward. That's between husband and wife. Caleb moved in front of her fully. Take one more step, Caleb warned. The 2 men behind Hale rested hands near their guns. Hale studied Caleb. You think you're her savior? He asked. No, Caleb replied. I just believe she gets to choose. She doesn't, Hale snapped. Midnight let out a sharp, angry sound from the corral. The wind picked up dust around them. Rose stepped to Caleb's side. I'm not going, she said again. Hale's face darkened. Then I'll drag you. Caleb's hand hovered near his rifle. Yet he had not fired at a man since leaving the army. He did not want to start now. But he would. Hale reached for Rose's arm. Caleb moved fast. He shoved Hale back hard. The man stumbled. One of the riders drew his gun halfway. Midnight exploded from the corral fence, slamming against the wood so hard the boards cracked. The noise startled the horses. Hale's mount reared. Chaos broke loose in seconds. Caleb grabbed Rose and pulled her behind the wagon. Stay down, he ordered. A shot rang out. Wood splintered above them. Caleb fired into the air. Enough, he roared. The sheriff's voice followed from the road. That's enough! Sheriff Dalton and 2 deputies rode into the yard. Hale cursed under his breath. Dalton dismounted slowly. Looks like you boys are causing trouble, he said evenly. She's my wife," Hale insisted. "And she says she's not going with you," Dalton replied. "That's not how it works." Dalton's eyes hardened. Actually, in this territory, a woman isn't livestock. The silence stretched. "If she accuses you of violence," Dalton added carefully, "that changes things." Rose stepped forward. "I do," she said. Hale stared at her in disbelief. "You'd lie to the law?" "I'm telling the truth." Dalton nodded slowly. "I suggest you leave, Mr. Hale, or you can spend time in my jail while we sort this out." Hale's jaw worked tight. "This isn't over," he said again. But this time, he sounded unsure. He mounted his horse. The three men rode off. Caleb stood frozen until they disappeared over the ridge. Then he turned to Rose. "You all right?" She nodded, but tears were streaming down her face. "I was so scared," she whispered. Caleb pulled her into his arms. "I won't let him take you," he said. For the first time, she held him back tightly. "I don't want to run anymore," she whispered against his chest. "I want to stay." Caleb closed his eyes. "Then stay." But even as he held her, he knew something. Men like Thomas Hale did not quit, and the look in Hale's eyes before he left had not been defeat. It had been promise. And Caleb had the feeling this fight was only beginning. Thomas Hale did not return the next day, or the day after that. But the waiting was worse than the fight. Caleb felt it in the air each morning when he stepped outside. The quiet felt too heavy. The birds scattered too fast. Even Midnight stayed close to the fence near the house, ears sharp, watching the horizon. Rose tried to go about her work as usual. She fed the chickens. She brushed the mares. She mended a torn saddle blanket by the kitchen window. But Caleb saw the way her hands shook when a wagon passed on the road. 3 days after the confrontation, Sheriff Dalton rode out alone. "He's gone," Dalton said as he dismounted. "Gone where?" Caleb asked. "Left town. Headed east. I took the morning train from Cheyenne." Rose let out a breath she had been holding for days. "He won't come back?" she asked. Dalton studied her. "Men like him don't like losing face, but he won't risk jail over it. Not now that you've spoken up." Rose nodded slowly. "Thank you, Sheriff." Dalton tipped his hat. "You did the brave part, Miss Bennett." After he left, Caleb and Rose stood in the yard together. "It's over," Caleb said quietly. Rose looked out across the fields. "Yes," she said, "it is." But something inside her still seemed uncertain. That night, they sat on the porch as the sun melted into gold behind the hills. "You could leave," Caleb said after a long silence. "Start somewhere new. Somewhere he won't ever find you." Rose looked at him. "And leave this?" She gestured toward the barn, toward the house, toward Midnight grazing in the fading light. "I don't want to run anymore," she said softly. "I've done enough running for one lifetime." Caleb swallowed. "You don't owe me anything." "I know." She turned toward him fully. "But I want to stay." Those words settled deep in his chest. "Not because I need protection," she added. "Not because I have nowhere else to go." "Then why?" Caleb asked. "Because this feels like home." The wind stirred her loose hair around her face. "Because when I stepped into that corral and touched Midnight, I felt something change. Not just in him, in me." Caleb leaned back in his chair, listening. "I've always been afraid," she continued. "Afraid of losing everything. Afraid of being alone. Afraid of speaking up." "You spoke up," Caleb said quietly. "Yes." She met his eyes. "Joe, and you stood with me." The silence between them was no longer heavy. It felt steady. "Rose," Caleb said slowly, I don't know much about fancy words. I don't know how to promise things perfect. She smiled faintly. I don't need perfect. I do know this, he continued. Since you came here, this ranch feels alive again. I feel alive again. Rose's breath caught slightly. I didn't realize how empty it had become until you filled it. She looked down at her hands. And if I asked you to stay, Caleb said carefully, not as hired help, not as someone passing through. She looked up, but as my partner, in this ranch, in this life. The world felt very quiet. You mean marry you? She asked softly. Caleb nodded once. Yes. There was no grand speech, no kneeling, just honesty. Rose's eyes filled with tears. Yes, she whispered. Caleb let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped for years. Yes? Yes. He reached for her hands. They were warm now. Steady. Midnight let out a low sound from the field, as if he approved. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in town. Sheriff Dalton stood in the front row. So did Mrs. Carter from the general store, and 2 ranch hands, who had once been afraid to go near midnight. Rose wore a simple white dress she stitched herself. Caleb wore his father's old suit coat. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb kissed her gently, like something fragile he intended to protect forever. But Rose was not fragile anymore. She was strong. That first year together was not easy. Drought hit in late summer. 2 calves were lost to sickness. Money ran thin, but they faced it together. Rose kept the books at night by lantern light, her careful handwriting tracking every expense. Caleb worked longer hours in the fields. Midnight became the heart of the ranch again. Rose trained him slowly, patiently, until he carried Caleb across the pasture with calm strength. The horse that once struck fear into every man now followed Rose like a shadow. Buyers began to notice. That black stallion, one trader said in town. Where'd you get him so gentle? Caleb only smiled. He was waiting, he would answer. By the 2nd year, the ranch had grown. They added 2 broodmares, built a stronger fence around the north pasture. Laughter filled the house again. One evening, as winter snow fell outside, Rose placed Caleb's hand on her stomach. I think we're going to have a baby, she said softly. Caleb froze. Then he laughed, the sound raw and full. Are you sure? I am. He pulled her close. I don't know how to be a father. You'll learn, she said, like Midnight did. Their son was born in the spring of 1881. They named him Samuel. He had Rose's gray eyes and Caleb's dark hair. Midnight stood outside the window the day they brought the baby home, watching quietly as if guarding the house. Years passed the way they always do, not in loud moments, but in small ones. Samuel taking his first steps in the barn, Rose teaching him to brush Midnight gently, Caleb lifting his son into the saddle for the first time. More horses filled the fields. More fences were built. They never became rich, but they became steady, strong, respected. In 1890, when Wyoming became a state, Caleb and Rose stood in town among the crowd listening to speeches. Samuel sat on Caleb's shoulders. Rose squeezed Caleb's hand. Remember the first day? She asked. When you climbed my fence? She laughed. You were so angry. He hadn't let anyone touch him. And he just did, she replied with a smile. Caleb looked at Midnight, tied near the hitching post, calm and proud. You changed everything, he said quietly. Rose shook her head. No, we did. Midnight lived many more years. When he finally passed in his sleep one quiet autumn night, They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch. Samuel placed a small stone at the grave. Caleb carved simple words into a wooden marker. Midnight, a horse who taught us trust. By the time gray touched Caleb's hair, the ranch had grown beyond what he ever imagined. Though Samuel took over most of the work, Rose still kept the books. They sat on the porch most evenings, watching the sun dip low over land that no longer felt lonely. "Do you ever regret leaving?" Caleb asked her once. "Leaving Kansas?" she said. "Yes." Rose leaned her head against his shoulder. "Not for a single moment." She looked out at the fields. "At first I thought I came here to escape." "And now?" Caleb asked. "Now I know I came here to find something." "What?" She smiled. "You." Caleb wrapped his arm around her. "And you found him brushing a neglected horse," he said. She laughed softly. "And he told me that horse hadn't let anyone touch him." Caleb looked out at the hill where midnight rested. "He was wrong," he said. Rose squeezed his hand. "No," she whispered. "He was just waiting for the right person." And so was Caleb.